This is episode 23 of the You, Me, and BTC podcast. Welcome to the show. All three of us are back together again for an intriguing host discussion. Recently, a service called MoneGraph was created that allows people to create digital certificates of ownership for images. These deeds can then be traded on the Namecoin blockchain. This could be a huge benefit for artists, but we found some potential drawbacks as well. Is it decentralized? Will art lovers really care about or trust digital deeds? We'll do our best to answer those questions and chat about much more, so stick around. Your hosts are Tim Baker, John Stuart, and myself, Daniel Brown. Here we go.
Hey everybody, this is episode number 23 for the You, Me, and BTC podcast. Today, we have a pretty interesting article to talk about. It's by TechCrunch.com. The title of the article is MoneGraph Uses Bitcoin Tech so Internet Artists Can Establish Original Copies of Their Work. So, this kind of relates to some stuff that we've talked about before on the podcast about intellectual property and stuff like that. I think before we were kind of asking if it would be possible to watermark an MP3 or something like that so that it couldn't be shared or couldn't be, traded around by people if somebody wanted to maintain ownership over it. And that's basically what this MoneGraph thing is. We'll read some paragraphs from the article to give you a better idea of what's happening here. Well, okay, so we'll just start at the beginning. People don't want to buy copies of art. They want the original, and that's been a huge problem for artists who create digital works that are easily copied. No scarcity means no market, so artists can't make ends meet. But MoneGraph, short for monetized graphics, uses cryptography to bring meet space scarcity to online art. Here's how MoneGraph works. Artists can visit the MoneGraph site and sign in with Twitter. They then submit the URL of a digital image they've created. In return, they receive a blockchain key and value they can store in a Namecoin wallet, similar to how they would store Bitcoin. This is their digital deed, a unique claim of ownership to the piece of art. If someone else submits the same image, MoneGraph detects that it's already been claimed. MoneGraph also tweets out an announcement of the ownership to commit it to public record. Yeah, so it's pretty funny. That's almost exactly the kind of thing that we were talking about before. I mean, I think this is a pretty interesting idea. I don't think any of us necessarily like intellectual property. Well, we definitely don't like intellectual property laws. And even the whole concept of intellectual property is a little... We're not all sure how we feel about it, I think. I think that's fair to say. But I think this is a pretty cool idea. Later in the article, they talk about the fact that you could share as many copies of whatever media this is. Well, I guess right now they only do it for visual media, for pictures. But you can share as many copies of that as you want, but there's still a record of which one is the original. I think that's pretty awesome because you can get a little bit of the best of both worlds, I think, with that. It's nice to be able to prove that this is your piece of art and that you still own the original, and yet at the same time let everybody else still have access to it and let it be shared freely.
I mean, I would think that they might, are they more saying that the artist would always keep the original? Because
no, they were saying it can be bought and sold.
Okay,
right.
I mean, that's what I thought, because I kind of skimmed through it. Because, that would make more sense to me. It's like, you just sell that for hire. Or, you just sell that one, you give all the other ones away for free, and then people can donate or whatever.
Yeah, they say later in the article that it's kind of like the old-fashioned way of painting, where if Van Gogh paints something pretty cool, well... there's pictures of that all over the internet probably, but there's still an original somewhere that is worth a butt ton more than that. So
Yeah, they basically say that this is the digital extension of that. Like you said, I think it's more so that it can be bought and sold than the artist just keeping the original. But if they wanted to do that, they could. And there might also be a way to keep track of who's owned it. It's probably a lot easier to keep track of who's owned it, so you might still be able to prove that you're the original owner. If you're trying to work with intellectual property laws and you don't want this to be shared, that might be a benefit of it. Not that I would do that or that any of us thinks that's an awesome thing in itself, but it's a nice thing for people who want that, I guess.
Yeah, I definitely like this idea that it's... Because my whole thing about the intellectual property is that it's still using force to stop people from doing stuff, where this is just... I mean, yeah, it's not using force. It's basically accomplishing the same thing, I guess. But it's... you're not bringing... I mean, especially bringing the government into it, but just bringing any kind of force or anything into it. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's what we said about DRM, digital rights management, when we talked about intellectual property. You know, it's the way iTunes has things set up and whatever. It's kind of annoying to have DRM, but it's a lot more legitimate than, I don't know, like a government threatening to put you in prison or something for trading music. So DRM, I think we said, was basically the private way of protecting your media. And in most cases, it's not perfect because there are ways that you can strip the DRM off of media. And I guess it's kind of the same here. You can copy it. It's just there is an original deed somewhere that can be proven to be the original. So
yeah, because I think that's... I mean, this might derail this into something completely off of this, maybe, but I think that's, like, with the digital rights management, the person who's like stripping it off isn't doing that to then say this is the original thing. They're saying they're doing it to just get it and not have to deal with whatever restrictions that puts on it. But this is like, yeah, I mean, I don't see how, like, even if you could do it, then the only person you're really hurting is the person who originally made it. But I guess what I was saying that might derail this is, like, for me, I don't really collect art in general, so already, but I do, I mean, I like art sometimes. It looks pretty and stuff. But, like, I'm not going to spend $15,000 on an original painting just because it's the original painting. I mean, especially for a dead person, I guess. Like, for a live person, I could make the argument that I'm supporting the artist, but, I mean, is this something that you guys would, or I guess it goes back to how in the intellectual property thing we talked about was that, at least I think we talked about it then, we've talked about it other times too, about inherent value and, like, beyond just people wanting to be able to say that they bought the original or the kind of the status that brings. I mean, is there any other real need for something like this? I'm not saying it's bad. I'm asking the question.
Yeah. I mean, like you, I'm not an art collector or anything like that by any means. But I'll say this. There's a slight difference here, I guess, from the old way of doing things, and that's that if you've ever been to, like, an art museum and you've seen a Van Gogh painting or something like that, you get up and you can see the texture of it and the brush strokes and things like that. When you look at a copy on the internet, it's not going to be like that. It's going to be a pixelated, although the pixels might be really small. It's going to be this pixelated JPEG representation of it. Even if you get, like, a printed copy, it's still not going to be the same. Even if you get a mimicked copy where somebody painted it almost exactly the same, there's still going to be slight differences in the brush strokes and things like that. They might not be able to replicate exactly.
Yeah.
With digital stuff, it sounds like you can copy an exact copy of it. It just doesn't come with this deed that says this is the original. So I think that might be a slight flaw. Although, like you were saying, with people buying originals, some of that might just be the prestige of having the original. I think there's maybe a little bit less reason to own the original in this case, just because it's digital and it's able to be copied exactly.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think for the most part, people would just use this for the prestige, like you said, John, of, hey, I have the original copy. How awesome is that? Which, that's fairly legitimate. And if you can afford it, and if you really do think it's that cool, then sure, go for it. Then buy the original and show it off. Why not? Another use case that I think was mentioned in the article was selling the rights to an advertiser or something like that, because then an artist could, I guess, with a blockchain or somehow show that they sold the original rights to, I don't know, Google or whoever wants to use them in a commercial or something like that. I think that would be a little bit easier to do and a little bit more legitimate, maybe, with a service like this, because it's not just about owning the original, but it's about owning the actual rights to that music and whoever created it. Or I guess I said music, which is another thing. I don't know what all kinds of media this could be. But I think that might be another use case where you could sell the rights. The original artist could sell the rights to an advertiser or to someone who wants to use it on a fairly large scale.
Yeah, I think that's the most important thing conceptually about this. I mentioned it earlier, I guess, that even if you as the artist don't keep the original and you do sell it to somebody, it's probably a lot easier to prove that you were the original owner. So even if maybe you're not selling rights and trying to make money off of this as somebody using it in a commercial or in a movie or something like that and getting royalties, maybe you just want recognition that you created this, you want attribution. That might be a lot easier with a service like this. And if you do want to sell the rights to it and get royalties, again, that might be a lot easier to prove with this that you're the original owner and to maintain that, and it'd be visible publicly. I guess it would be.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it would just be easier. I think, right now, I don't think, I mean, how can you really right now? Because I remember just thinking about this now reminded me of it a while back on Facebook. Some guy I'm friends with on Facebook was putting out a bunch of images, and I think most of them were Bitcoin, some of them were some other stuff. And someone asked, whose are these? And he's like, oh, it's mine. And neither one of them were like, oh, we need to prove. They didn't get in an argument as to who owned it. And I think I started thinking about it then is well, I mean, is there any way really for him to be able to prove that it's his, completely?
But see that?
Yeah.
I guess I don't exactly know how the service works, and maybe one of us should use it, or maybe a listener can try it out and let us know. But
this is a little bit off topic, but maybe an avenue for you to go down. This actually, at the end of the article, it says it could empower tomorrow's meme artists to at least receive credit they deserve while using free internet distribution to delight the world at large. I think that's an awesome thing. Memes get spread around so much, it can be really hard to find out who was the original person, but...
Yeah, that makes sense, but I guess what I was actually just about to mention is, depending on exactly how this service works, would it really be possible to prove for certain who the original owner is? And here's the possible exploitation that I might see. Somebody could create an image, a meme, sure, why not, and put it in this blockchain and get this key or this deed or whatever, and say that it's theirs. And I think in the first paragraph or two, it said, you do it by submitting the URL. But then, what if somebody puts the same image on a different URL and submits that? Now, I guess you could see by the timing which one was submitted first, although I don't think that quite proves it, because somebody could have just copied it before it was submitted. Maybe, and I guess another thing is this digital key or deed, is that only created from the URL, or do they actually take somehow the data from the image and create the key from the actual image? Because if it's from the URL, then you could change what image that URL points to, and it could get confusing. So I don't really know. I guess it really depends on the technical specifications and how it really works. And yeah, I guess, but even then, even if you did use the actual image to create this key, I don't know. It's just, I don't know if what exactly that all means, but it's just something that I'm not sure about.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought about that too. It sounded a little weird to me when they're like, you just copy the URL.
Right, and also I was thinking the sentence in there says they submit it to Twitter, or they tweet about it to commit it to public record, which works to a certain extent, but I don't see Bitcoin enthusiasts being nearly as trustworthy of Twitter as that would require. I don't think, I mean, so you put it on Twitter, therefore it's true. That's a little tough.
Well, it says they sign in with Twitter, I guess, and then.
Well, right, but it says
they store the blockchain key in a wallet.
Right, but it says, yeah. So I guess maybe the Twitter thing is just a little extra bonus that they tweet about it to help you out, so that people can see.
That's what it sounded like. Was
but,
like more like bring it to public knowledge. Be like, okay, we're doing this now. Now you can check it. But your point about just whoever gets it there first is, yeah, I mean, that's a pretty good point. That's one of the biggest problems with any kind of patent stuff, is it really doesn't necessarily protect. I mean, it protects whoever gets the idea there first, and it doesn't really matter. And legally, that's all that really matters, I guess. But
right, I still want to know: is the actual image kind of embedded in the key? Like, do they hash it or anything, or do they just create some key and say that it's connected to this image arbitrarily? Or is the image actually somehow inside the key? I don't know. Or the URL, maybe.
That's definitely something I would want to know.
Right. Or even if it's, I guess the article said this would only be for images, but hopefully you could extend this to music, like I was saying earlier, or things like that. Because that is what the article said, right? Just the URL of an image.
Yeah, so far it seems like it's just images.
Why wouldn't you be able to do music or video?
Well, if it is set up to copy the data, it might not be configured to deal with data other than image data.
Well, actually, and the name of the service is MoneGraph, which stands for
monetized graphics.
Yeah, monetized graphics, so.
Yeah, and video is another thing, which video is kind of just another step up or a couple steps up from this, I guess. I don't know. Maybe we should. I guess we didn't say this explicitly at the beginning of the episode or even at any point yet. Maybe we should connect this a little bit more to Bitcoin, more obviously. Well, it says it uses the blockchain to keep track of the deed. And another important thing, and something that relates this whole topic to Bitcoin, in one of the later paragraphs, a meme artist called Ronan V or Ronan the Fifth, I don't really know, says that art is a currency. The evolution of art into digital currency is no question the future, and this is a good step. I think presenting it as a one-to-one translation of the way physical art is bought and sold may be misleading. That said, what it's actually doing is pretty cool, and I think will grow either with them or others doing similar things. I don't know what that was supposed to mean. But yeah, so I don't know. I guess the art is becoming almost like a Bitcoin, sort of, except that every piece of art might have a different value.
Right. One barrier there that is also mentioned in the article is if it does sort of become like a currency, and if art is traded kind of based on the originals and things like that, the article says it's going to be difficult to convince people to accept some random digital key as just as valuable as the original. I mean, if somebody shows me an original Van Gogh, and if, I don't know, if it has whatever papers or whatever it needs so that I can know that it's not counterfeited, if I have somebody look at it, an original Van Gogh, I know that's valuable. But if somebody emails me this image and says, hey, do you want to buy it? I have this key and it means that you own it. People are going to be like, what are you talking about? Why? I see the image right there. And I don't know. It's going to be harder to convince people to accept it as an original. I think it's definitely possible. I just think it'll take time for people to kind of change their mindset.
Well, I mean, any kind of, just Bitcoin versus any kind of physical currency, I think is going to I think you'd see the same kind of resistance to that. But I guess, even more with this, although I think, I see this as, like, he says art is a currency. I'm like, yeah, kind of like everything else can be a currency. It's just art is a lot. I don't know where I'm going with this, but.
Actually, no, I know exactly, well, maybe I don't know exactly what you mean, but here's what I think you mean. Basically, anything that has value could be traded kind of like a currency. And it's interesting because I think it was just today I was listening to an episode of Bitcoins and Gravy where they were talking about Solar Coin, which, that's just one example, but they were sort of turning solar energy into a currency that could be traded on a blockchain. And it's a little fuzzy to me. How does that all work and everything? But essentially, if you generate and use solar energy, you can create these tokens because you create solar energy, or not create it, but collect it, I guess. I don't know. But that's just one example of how something that has value, energy, can be used as a currency, as something with value, just like art. Art has value. So if you want to sort of,
but who redeems for not talking about the art? I have some stuff to say about the art, but who redeems the energy for the light, for the solar energy? Because it has to be redeemable for something,
right? Yeah, I know what you mean.
Or not necessarily redeemable, but because
I know what you mean, and I honestly have no idea. I don't know the specs, and I don't know how all that works, and that was just one example. There's other things like that.
Oh, there's hundreds of altcoins that I don't understand the point of them.
Well, I didn't just mean altcoins. I meant something. But I guess a commodity backs a currency, sort of. Yeah, I guess that's pretty much it.
Art is a currency. I get that, but I think saying it like that kind of puts art up as this, and that's why I kind of had a problem. And what you said was like, yeah, anything could be traded. It's saying like art is this wonderful expression, and because I put work into this, therefore other people should value it. And I don't really agree with that. And obviously if someone's going to trade you for it, then it's valuable.
I was actually thinking something fairly similar today. And I don't mean this as a slight to any artists or anything. I love art, and I have paid for art in the past. Not just art, but music, and I want
music
to pay.
Music is an art, Daniel?
Well, I meant not just painting or whatever. And I plan on probably buying more art in the future and supporting artists. I absolutely love art. But when you really think about it, art doesn't really have much utility, or I want to say value, but it's really hard to say value because, especially in the Bitcoin world, you can mean a million different things when you say value. So I'll just stick with utility. It really has, other than just serving to bring enjoyment to people, it has very little utility or purpose I shouldn't say purpose, because there's plenty of purpose there and it's amazing. But honestly, I guess what I'm saying is we can live without it if we had to.
Yeah, most of our lives we can live without. But art's a good example. Yeah, and I think I get that from a lot of, not that I have that many people that I talk to, but I guess it's more just hearing people talk on the internet, or not, I don't actually hear them talk on the internet, but and I guess I see it more in painting stuff, like it's this, this art is good. The Mona Lisa is a great painting. If I was offered the Mona, and this probably just shows how uncultured I am and how much of I'm a brute for art. if someone was going to, I would not buy the Mona Lisa for anything over $1, unless just to trade it for more, because I hate that painting. I don't hate it because it's a bad painting. I hate it because everyone is always like, this is a wonderful painting. It's amazing. And I don't see it. And maybe I'm trying to compensate for my inability to see art, and then I hate it. But,
well, actually, I would say I don't really enjoy that painting.
No, I don't either. It's just a lady there. I mean, maybe there's some more to it, but
I wouldn't really want it hanging on my wall. It's kind of creepy.
But yeah, and I do this with music a lot. I'll say, oh, that's a bad song, which is probably, being completely fair, I shouldn't say that one song's bad or the other. I could say one to me is bad, or that it's vacuous, but that it's like people will say like about one thing about all the paint, and I know this is it's a stereotype about modern art, about it just being a bunch of people throwing, and maybe I'm not even thinking of the same people, maybe I'm thinking the same people are saying things, but modern art of just throwing stuff at a paper, and some people say, oh, well, that's just expression, which actually I kind of like that stuff more. I don't understand why people are spending $40,000 on it, but if I'm going to hang something on my wall, I find it more interesting just someone just expressing themselves, just throwing paint at a wall, or like, John, do you remember the, Malcolm in the Middle episode where Hal takes off from his job and just spends like a week painting?
No, I don't know if I've seen that one.
He basically goes crazy in their garage and ends up just covering himself naked in paint and jumping onto the piece of paper. So, I mean, I would rather pay for something like that than the Mona Lisa, which is what I'm talking about with the art as currency. I think some people look at it as having some kind of intrinsic value more so than, I don't know. I'm trying to find something around me to, yeah, go ahead.
I definitely know what you mean, and I agree with most of it, but at the same time, there are objective, quantifiable things that make something a good piece of art in like a strict sense, and then there are things that make it good in a subjective, personal sense. Like, just yesterday I was watching a video of a guy who was reviewing a book, and I'm not going to talk about the books that he was talking about because it doesn't really matter, but he talked about one book and then he talked about another book, and he said that book A was well written and book B was badly written, but he preferred book B because he thought it had better characters and like a story that was more relatable to him. Well, he didn't really like the characters in book A, and he didn't think the story was that amazing, but he said the writing was much better. So I mean, so there are things like that, and most people aren't willing to admit that they like something that is poorly executed, or like most people won't say, I like this song even though it's bad. They think it's good just because they like it. So there are things that make some art better than others, but that's not necessarily what makes it valuable.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess maybe it's just because I read more than I look at art, but I can understand that more in a book because we have the rules of language and grammar, but then even then you have some books where their entire purpose is just not following any of those rules. But I think you could say, yeah, that like if the entire book looks like it's being the person just trying to write it in a traditional sense, and then they're maybe not constantly, but they're making a decent amount of just grammatical errors and stuff like that, or that they write in just a poor way grammar-wise, I think you can say that it's not proper writing etiquette or something. But I guess even that gets a little bit weird, because then I'm thinking about art, and it's like, well, could you say that there's a right way to do art, which I guess is just why you have all the different schools of art that come up.
Well, yeah, I think there definitely is, and I wouldn't claim to be an expert. I'm probably more like you, where I tend to notice those things more with books, but like in my life, as I've learned more about music, I see these kind of things in music, and there's definitely things like that in art too. Like I saw a thing where somebody was critiquing a comic, and they were talking about how the perspective wasn't right, and like they didn't place objects of importance in prominent places in the frame. And there's psychology of how we view images of certain shapes and sizes and stuff like that. So there are definitely technical things that can go right and wrong in visual art as well.
I guess what I'm thinking about I'll just use your phrase because that would be better than what I've been stumbling over, just visual art, is that because even if it is objectively wrong, in any kind of visual art, the person can always say that, oh, I was trying to do that. That was on purpose because it was ironic or something. So I guess that's more where I'm coming from, is that you can't ever prove that it's bad, I guess, or that it was bad not on purpose.
Yeah. Maybe going back to how this whole thing started, though, you were saying that you don't really like the idea that people are like, well, I put work into this and I made it, so it must be worth something. I definitely agree with you on that. I don't think something is valuable just because it has worth. If you wash your whole car with a toothbrush or something like that, I don't think that's more valuable than if you washed it at a car wash just because it took more time and effort. But what this MoneGraph thing does, though, is not necessarily that. It doesn't.
I wasn't saying that's what
artificially.
They were doing, but
yeah, no, I'm not saying that that's what you were saying, but it doesn't create artificial value. It says, I'm the original owner of this, so if this has value, I can prove that I'm the one that deserves it, or that I'm the one that you should pay if you think that this deserves to be paid for.
Yeah, and I mean, I completely acknowledge that there's a very real value to someone out there. If someone for like a online visual artist who creates something, and that person's like, okay, I want the prestige of having that original copy. I want to buy that from them. I'm not saying, I mean, I wouldn't do that. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying it's a waste of money. I mean, if you get value out of it, wonderful for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think this service is great for that, because just talking about music, because that's what I know, it kind of annoys me when it's like somebody makes this album or something and they're like, well, you have to pay $15 for the CD if you want to listen to it. And I'm like, well, I kind of want to listen to it, but I don't think it's worth $15 to me. Well, you have no choice but to pay $15 for it. And this kind of goes along with how I feel about pirating, where I think people who get annoyed at pirating are like, well, you assume that somebody would pay for it if they had to. You're assuming that the people that download it would actually pay for it. Like, you don't know how they might not care about it enough to pay for it, so you can't really complain about it. And something like this doesn't force somebody to pay for anything to enjoy it. I guess that's the thing I like most about this.
Yeah.
I don't really want to talk about this much because it's not really related to Bitcoin, but it's just kind of funny.
Most of this podcast hasn't been related. We went into like art critiquing, Daniel.
Well, no, I mean, we talked about how it has value, and that's definitely important, and what has value and what gives something value. I think that all is relevant. But I just want to say this because it's kind of funny. One of the strangest art exhibits I've seen, well, not strange, I guess I would say pointless, is it was an art museum, and one of the exhibits was just a blue board leaning against a wall, and it was called like Plank on Wall or something. And it was like taller than me. I don't even think it was wooden. I think it was like made out of ceramics or plastic or something, but it was just this perfectly blue. It was all the same color. There was no texture. There was no like grain in the wood, anything. It was just like a blue plastic board leaning against the wall. And yeah, I don't know.
It's expressionism, anyway. Daniel, and that's the only part of art class that I ever did well in.
There's one at the Carnegie Museum of Art in Pittsburgh that's just like, it's a frame that you would put a picture in, but there's no picture in it. It's like the frame is the exhibit.
Yeah, yeah.
It's just this metal frame. It's really industrial looking, too. It's not even like a pretty frame. It's just metal rectangles, pretty much.
One interesting one that I read about, I wasn't actually there, but it must have been like an expo or something that lasted for a few days, and on the first day of the expo, they put out a rotten banana. On the next day, there was one that was a little bit less rotten, and every day they changed it out, and it became more and more yellow and then green. It was like reverse decay or something, I don't know. You know those VPN sites where they advertise privacy? Why pay for a VPN when you can have a full root access Linux server? You can even turn your VPS into a VPN if you wanted to. A VPS is basically a virtualized server that you have complete control over. You can reinstall, reboot, or start your server instantly from the control panel. Prices start at just $7 a month, and of course we wouldn't even be talking about these guys if they didn't accept Bitcoin. If this sounds good to you, check out www.vertvps.com right now. Just select BitPay at checkout. To get you started, use coupon code UME and BTC for 50% off your first month's invoice. The website again is vertvps.com. I want to talk about something a little bit more hypothetical. It's something that I heard about recently, which is really similar in that it protects art or media, but there might be an important difference. Now, I don't know the details about this. I don't remember who even said it, so this is just a hypothetical thing I want to talk about. But I want to know, well, I guess what I heard was that with the blockchain, you can create one single copy of media, which is related to MoneGraph, except somehow, I think I heard, or even if I didn't hear, just I want to talk about this. What if you could create one single copy of media with the blockchain, and somehow if you sent that music to someone, you would no longer have it, and you would no longer be able to listen to it? I don't know. I thought that would be pretty interesting, and if it is possible, that could really, I don't know, it would be like DRM on like steroids, because it would be physical. Well, I guess if it was music or even a picture, you could, like music, you could listen to it and record it like from your speakers or something, or if it was a picture, you could take a picture of your computer screen or something. So, in a similar way, it would be replicable, but not identically, which with this MoneGraph thing, I'm pretty sure you can replicate it identically, but there would still be that original deed. But it would be cool if you really could not replicate it besides just taking a picture or recording it or something.
I think that's a pretty cool idea.
It would be like this MoneGraph thing where you would have an original, but it would basically be the only one, I guess. I don't know. Maybe it's all meaningless, though, because if people were able to record the audio well enough, then I don't know. Maybe it really would make no difference at all. Maybe it would still be just as copyable as anything else. So maybe it really wouldn't make that much difference. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
maybe, or it might be like what I was talking about earlier with how art used to be. I mean, if you get somebody to take or scan a painting, it doesn't have the texture, or if you get somebody to make a replica of it, it might not have the exact same brush strokes to a T.
Right.
But it's pretty much the same thing. So, I mean, you might get into that with this, which is pretty interesting. It's almost just like an exact digital version of that.
Yeah, and maybe they could combine a single copy with an original deed, like with Namecoin or whatever, and that way it's a lot harder to copy, and anytime you do copy it, you should really lose a lot of quality, just like with these paintings we're talking about. But there's also an original deed that is clearly there. Yeah, so maybe it would be helpful to combine those two ideas.
Yeah.
So as we were recording all that, we just decided that we would look up some of the answers to those questions we have, or just, we watched a video to get some more information about how this all works. So we will actually explain a little bit more now. I don't think it answered every single question, but it was pretty helpful. It was actually some of the creators Kevin McCoy and Anil Dash. One of the biggest things I got out of that was that the Namecoin record actually, as far as I can tell, it includes both the URL and a hash of the actual file. Does that seem right to you? So it's actually both of the possibilities that we talked about, the URL and the actual file. Is that what you guys got out of that?
Yeah, that's what it seemed like. And it also, they had some text on there that said, like, this URL was published. And
right. One thing, I'm still a little fuzzy on how important Twitter is. I can't tell if Twitter is actually part of the record or if they just use it to communicate a little bit. I'm not really sure. When you initiate one of these records, you're supposed to tweet the URL and it'll give you one of these records somehow. So at the very least, they use Twitter to say, hey, I need a record for this file. But what I'm not sure is there anything with Twitter that is actually part of the record? Or do we need Twitter to prove who owned what? Because in the Namecoin record, there was a Twitter URL. It said, there was a link there that said, I guess, that this is the tweet we're talking about. This is where the record originated and stuff like that. So they are using Twitter fairly significantly. I just can't tell if they need it or if they're just using it to communicate a little bit. And the problem I would see is if they are relying on Twitter as part of the record, if they need Twitter to prove things and to prove who owned what, honestly, I would throw this whole idea out. Why would we? There's this whole group of people who think we need a blockchain, who think we need distributed consensus, and all of a sudden we're going to turn everything over to Twitter. I don't know.
Yeah, like you said, it was kind of hard to see. Watching that video made it seem like Twitter was a little more important than I thought it was, but I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I would go as far as you to say that they should throw the whole idea out, but it's definitely not as rock solid if everything relies on Twitter.
Right. I would say, and this is sometimes it's just something you have to do, but I think you're basically right. I mean, for the most part, we can trust Twitter, and I mean, it could fall apart eventually or it could be hacked, but at least for the time being, I'm sure it would work, but I just don't think it could hold up long term if you really needed them. Even if, I mean, you could trust them to be honest, maybe. Sure, let's say you trusted Twitter completely and you didn't think they were going to lie to you. That's one thing, but, you know, there was in the Namecoin record, there was a URL. Well, what if Twitter changes the way their system works and that URL is no longer valid and it doesn't point to your original tweet? So even if it's not because they're dishonest, it's still a system that can change or have problems and things like that. So,
well, yeah, I was thinking about that too, because like, what if you publish this on your own URL and then you stop paying for it or whatever, and it just gets shut down? But if they do hash the actual data,
right,
the URL is more just important for publishing purposes than for the actual piece of art. So from that perspective, yeah, I don't know, that makes it a little bit more secure.
It still seems to me kind of, I don't see why anyone is going to do this, really. Why anyone would pay, because you're introducing scarcity into something where there is no scarcity. Yeah, I mean, again, maybe it's just because I'm not an art person, but they were talking down at the bottom about meme people being able to take, MoneGraph could empower tomorrow's meme artists to at least receive the credit they deserve while still using free internet distribution to delight the world at large. Beyond, like, just as, like, a trivia question, I don't know that too many people care who created the Doge meme. It's not like if that's what they're talking about, like, with, like, meme stuff, like, or just any kind of this art stuff, I just don't understand why someone's gonna pay you to have the original of this. Like, I understand original physical art with the whole, like, I mean, you could even just say, like, oh, I want the original Van Gogh because he's touched it. Something like that. or like what John's saying about like there's a specific way that he did the brushstrokes, and even as much as you study it, you probably won't get every single one of those brushstrokes, but I really don't see why anyone would pay for this, just because there's not really, it's like, oh, I could pay for this, and then I could be like, oh, I have the original, and then most people are going to be like, we don't care.
Tim, I think that's generally true on a personal level. For the most part, a lot of people might not care about this or want this. I think it comes back to that second use case, though, where you're talking large scale, kind of commercial. Honestly, I think for the most part, it would be advertising. If people want to use your art to advertise their product. And this is what they even said this in the video. They were talking about how, if you share something on social media and it goes all over the place, and then all of a sudden somewhere somebody's monetizing it on a fairly large scale, but it's not connected to the artist and they're not the ones getting the money for that. So I know what you mean, Tim, on a personal level. I just think on a large commercial scale, it might be a lot more helpful to certain people.
I thought that they were meaning that it got released on social networks, and then like the social network is then monetizing it.
I think that's what they were saying.
Okay, well, people need to realize that the reason why Facebook and Twitter are free is because they're not, you're the product. What you put on there is what they're selling. And whether that's your pictures or it's just ad revenue to you, it's not free because they are nice people. Not to say that Facebook and Twitter are horrible people, but you're going to get monetized with stuff like that as long as you're putting stuff on there.
Yeah. Well, okay, so I think I would agree with both of you guys too, saying that on a personal level, I'm not really that interested in having the original piece of art. But like you said earlier, somebody might want to buy it just to support the artist. And then, as Daniel's saying, that second use value is key here. And even if you're not trying to sell it, well, I'll stick for the selling right now. I remember this was maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, a band called Periphery, they posted something about somebody basically just copied an MP3 of one of their songs and gave it a different title and was trying to sell it through like Bandcamp, I think it was. They were basically selling somebody else's song, and they had enough fan base and people who knew that this was actually their song to go over there and be like, hey, you're an idiot, like, we don't want this here, get out of here, or whatever. And so from that point of view, this could definitely be helpful for that. Like you're saying, on a commercial scale, being able to prove that you were the original creator, but even just getting attribution for it. Like, say I send an email to somebody who's shooting a movie, and I'm like, hey, I want to do the music for your movie. I want to write a score and record it for you, or send you the sheet music and have somebody else record it or whatever. And they're going to say, well, why should I do that? And I send them this song, and I'm like, well, I wrote this. And they're like, that's pretty good, but how do I know you're not just sending me somebody else's crap? Like, I can prove that this was my piece of work.
Can you prove it online,
though? Because... no, I'm saying with this kind of service that we're talking about. I know,
but how can you prove it then? I'm just thinking about this now. Like, you send it to them, and it says, what does it say in it? This was made by John... Well, you
could do that. They had that line of text that was included with the URL and everything like that in the information in that video that we just watched.
Yeah, but
so I guess you could put anything you want in that line of text. And if you could, I don't know, Daniel might be able to answer this better than me, but could you show that you were the original person who owns the address that this was stored at?
Right. Yeah, that's more what I mean, because it's so easy online. I can just, unless they're like, oh, you need to go through your Twitter, your Facebook, your email, which I guess you could do, but all those could be hacked too. And I'm not, like, they can prove to a certain amount that, yeah, it's probably them, but I don't think that this is, and I guess no one's saying that it is, but...
Well, here's the thing. I still am fairly fuzzy on exactly how the service works, so I'm not sure that this all necessarily applies, but here are my thoughts. Let's just start with Bitcoin. there are ways that you can prove that a certain Bitcoin address is yours because you can, like, sign a message with it.
Yeah.
I haven't done this in a while, but basically I think somebody sends you a message, you sign it with your private key, you send it back to them, they can check by your public key that you were the one who signed it. So basically you can prove, hey, this is my public key, I'm the one who owns it. And I think that would work with this thing, because whatever address that the deed is sitting at, you can say, hey, prove to me that that's your address by signing this message with your private key, and then I'll know that you currently hold the deed. I think you could do that. And even, I'm pretty sure you could trace, if you wanted to find out not just who currently owns the rights, but who created it, you could, I think, follow the blockchain back, see where it originated, and ask someone to sign that key and prove that they are the original creator. So I'm not sure if that's how all of this works. I don't know if they rely on public keys, and I've never used Namecoin, so maybe it's a little different, but that's what I would think, is you could do stuff like that.
From the video, it definitely sounded like they were going for the kind of thing where you could trace it all the way back to the original. I don't think they ever said that straight out, but it kind of sounded like they were implying that.
Okay, right. One issue, too, that I was just thinking is, well, what happens to all the media that is already created? Someone could sort of claim ownership of it. That would be interesting, and I don't know if there's much to say other than I don't know how that would all work.
I don't think you could really, like, I don't know that anyone would, I mean, that might be something to look into, like, history-wise, if people, after the patents and trademark stuff started getting set up in this country, if they started doing stuff that had been invented, like, that information is so much more widespread now that people are like, why? We don't care that you made that, or that you, I mean, because there's no way for them to prove that you made it, because it's just like, oh, I'll just grab this first. And you could just, like, oh, I don't know.
Well, actually, that's actually another thing that I don't know if they actually solved that problem. It's something we brought up at the beginning of the episode, and I don't think watching that video helped. I still don't think they've solved this problem, but somebody could take a copy of that image, put it on a different URL, create a deed for that URL with the same image, and start trading that around and say, hey, it's the original. I think that would still be possible, so I don't know.
Yeah, just think about that. Even without, like, even if you had two of them put up, because we were saying before that someone could just take them, just, okay, you made this, I'll copy it and send it up first. And that's not something I think you can ever solve. That's just a problem of people not being honest. But just like this, unless they're just going to say the first person, I guess maybe they already kind of said, like, the first person who does it is always right.
Right.
I mean, then you could just say, well, the person who is faking, like, who copied it and put it up there could be like, oh, I had the idea first. And I don't think you're ever really going to be able to fix that kind of a problem.
Yep.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Thanks for listening to episode 23. Remember to check out our website, youmeandbtc.com. All of the music in today's show was from John Stuart. We'll see you next Thursday.